Hi guys, Clay here, welcoming you to the inaugural episode of Rare and Friends Reviews. In the last 18 months, David and the team have covered just about every fan site trope except for traditional game reviews. Well, that's all about to change. Sort of. See, whereas most video reviews on the internet will focus on the efforts of a single reviewer, exploring the depths, thematics, and technical merits of a particular title, here at Rare and Friends, we've decided to do things a little bit differently. While you'll be stuck with one of our obnoxious voices for the majority of these reviews, they've been more of a collaborative effort than you might expect. The full staff roster, David, Jeff, and myself, are going to individually score each game so that we can find an overall average Rare and Friends review score for each title. But more on that later. The first game we're going to look at is the one that started it all, Jetpac. To understand the development of Jetpac itself, we must look at the formation of what would eventually become Rare. Rare's early history is an interesting one. The brothers Stamper, that is, Chris and Tim, and Carol Stamper, Tim's wife, collaborated in 1982 to set up Ashby Computers and Graphics, a development studio of sorts which focused on creating software for the relatively new ZX Spectrum, the UK market leader at the time. The trading name of the company was Ultimate Play the Game, though most fans and press would shorten this to simply Ultimate. Jetpac was the first title that the Stampers developed for the Spectrum, and the game was initially released in 1983 in two formats, as a standard Spectrum cassette and also as a cartridge, which was compatible with the ill-fated ZX Interface 2 add-on for the Spectrum. It was the first of only 10 games released in this format. This was quickly followed up by a port to the Commodore VIC-20 in the same year for us Americans, and also to the BBC Micro in 1984, a rival computer which, unfortunately, stole Spectrum's market share. But that's another story. As a solid first title from Ultimate, Jetpac solidified its place in gaming history despite being relatively unknown outside of the UK. For an admirably simple game with relatively modest ambitions, the story is simply subdued. You are Jetman, space pilot on a mission to do something. En route to wherever this guy is going, he ends up crashing his ship, which breaks into 3 equal parts. He also seems to have a super tiny fuel tank, which means he has to keep making pit stops to refuel. It's a good job that all of these strange, unexplored alien worlds have giant pink boxes of fuel. How handy is that? Now let's make no mistake, Jetpac is hardly going to cause your Spectrum to overheat. However, despite being relatively simple, the game is rather pleasant to look at. As a single screen experience, the Stampers took advantage of the extra memory and flooded the screen with multiple enemies of varying designs and attack patterns. These enemies are randomly generated in different solid colors, subtly improving the player's perception of each enemy rather than them all blurring together in one single blob. The sprites for the rocket ship themselves are nicely detailed, and also, I'm a pretty big fan of the visual effect for Jetman's gunfire. As mentioned previously, there is no denying that Jetpac is a reasonably simple game, especially when compared to Ultimate's own very subsequent releases for the Spectrum. This is not a pejorative, however. Simple doesn't always mean bad, and this holds true for Jetpac. Once you get a hold of the controls, it can be a very fulfilling and joyous experience. Jetman can walk, shoot, fly, using the titular jetpack itself, and even use an often overlooked hover feature to hold himself in a fixed position on the y-axis whilst moving left to right. As you work your way through the game, the enemies change their attack patterns, with the game generally getting harder and harder. The game is divided into 16 stages and arguably 4 chapters. For example, Stage 1 will require Jetman to rebuild his ship before fueling up, whereas stages 2 to 4 only ask him to collect the fuel. In stage 5, Jetman has crashed a different ship and the cycle repeats. After reaching level 17, the game begins looping without a credits sequence. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot to say here about the sound and music of the game.
There are no melodies, and the audio language of the game is conveyed using bleeps and bloops. It's hard to fault Ultimate at the time, though, as the Spectrum had very poor audio hardware. I would argue that despite being Ultimate's simplest Spectrum game, and debatably the simplest game in Rare's entire back catalog, Jetpac offers a surprising amount of replayability. I first discovered this game via Donkey Kong 64, and I'm not ashamed to say that I played it more times than was necessary to progress in that game. After rediscovering this gem via Rare Replay, I played it much more, and learned to play it reasonably well. Once you get the grips with the mechanics, I think you'll plug far more time in this than you'd expect. So, was this game a success? Well, that's a tricky one to answer. It put Ultimate on the map back in 1983, and definitely helped the Stampers with their tiny startup that would eventually become one of the highest regarded gaming studios in the industry. However, the majority of their early success was contained mainly within the niche British home PC gaming crowd. The sequel that followed, Lunar Jetman, was another cult hit amongst the same circles in the UK, and eventually a third title hit the NES some years later titled Solar Jetman, which saw a fair spread of popularity across the globe. Jetman went into hibernation after this until he received his most mainstream appearance to date. The original Jetpac was an unlockable bonus game in the multi-million selling smash hit Donkey Kong 64. Players were forced to collect 5,000 points in Jetpac to unlock an item required for reaching the final boss in DK64 itself. What a wacky and wonderful way to force people to try out a game! Especially back in this era when emulating classic games on a new system was barely a thing, especially on Nintendo consoles. Jetpac Refueled was released on March 28, 2007 for the Xbox Live Arcade. Containing a gorgeous yet surprisingly restrained reimagining of the core concepts, plus a port of the original game. It sold reasonable numbers for a digital release of that era, and again helped the series to gain more international recognition. Finally, we hit Rare Replay in 2015, which surprisingly included emulations of all three 80s Jetman games, plus a copy of Jetpac Refueled, meaning that the entire history of the character is available on a single disc, save for the DK64 cameo. What's brilliant about this is that you can play the port of the original Jetpac on Jetpac Refueled, which means smoother frame rate and animations, or opt to play the direct emulation of the original title with the warts and all. It really is the best solution for every type of gamer. That's quite a long legacy for such a small and basic game. Jetpac has clearly touched a number of players around the world, and even though I was a little late to the party, I can happily say that it's definitely a classic and well worth playing in any way you can. Rare and Friends gives Jetpac an overall 7 out of 10.
Hey guys, this is Clay. Thanks so much for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and follow us for more reviews in the future. Also, check out some of our other videos here. See you next time.